It started with something small, just a notice taped to my door, claiming my fence was out of compliance. I laughed it off at first, thinking it was a simple mistake. But within weeks, that single piece of paper spiraled into threats, mounting fines, and neighbors whispering behind my back. What should have been my dream home quickly turned into a battlefield, all because the HOA decided they wanted me gone. But they didn't know who they were dealing with. What happens when a petty board crosses the one homeowner who refuses to bow down? Stay tuned. You won't believe how far this went. When I first moved into Maplewood Estates, it felt like I had finally made it. The streets were lined with carefully trimmed hedges. Kids rode their bikes in packs until sunset, and the kind of peace I'd dreamed of after years of renting was finally mine. My little house sat on the edge of the cul-de-sac, with a wide porch perfect for morning coffee and a backyard where I planted tomatoes and sunflowers. Neighbors waved politely, and at first, I thought I'd stumbled into the perfect slice of suburban life. The HOA promised community harmony, and I believed it. Rules about lawn height and mailbox colors seemed harmless enough, just background noise in exchange for safety and order. But behind those manicured lawns and smiling greetings, there was something else. A quiet pressure, an expectation to conform. I didn't notice it at first, but it was there. The way people paused if your garbage cans weren't rolled in by a certain hour, or the way notes appeared on windshields when someone parked in the wrong spot. For a while, I brushed it off. After all, I wasn't here to cause trouble. I just wanted to live in peace, tend to my garden, and enjoy the home I had worked so hard for. But little did I know, the same community that had welcomed me with polite smiles was about to turn into something far darker. And the first spark of conflict would come from the very place I least expected. At first, it was easy to ignore. A letter here, a reminder there. The HOA claimed my fence needed repainting, even though I had finished the job just 6 months before moving in. I shrugged, sent back photos as proof, and thought that would be the end of it. But 2 weeks later, another letter arrived, this time about my lawn. They said it was patchy and non-compliant. I stood in my yard staring at the grass, green and freshly cut, wondering if I was losing my mind. The fine started small, $25 here, $50 there, numbers that felt like petty annoyances rather than real threats. But they piled up, arriving almost weekly, until the total climbed into the hundreds. Every envelope carried the same sterile letterhead and the same demand: comply or pay. It wasn't about the money anymore. It was about power. Then came the inspection. One morning, I found 2 board members in my backyard, clipboards in hand, jotting notes like my garden was a crime scene. When I confronted them, they coolly told me they had every right to enter common property areas. Except this wasn't common property. This was my yard, my safe space. I felt violated, humiliated, and more determined than ever not to give them the satisfaction of compliance. Still, the pressure kept building. A neighbor whispered that the board was keeping an eye on me. Someone else warned me that if I didn't straighten up, they'd move to place a lien on my home. That's when the situation shifted from irritating to terrifying. Because I wasn't just fighting over grass anymore, I was fighting for the roof over my head. What struck me most wasn't the letters themselves, but the way neighbors began to treat me. The same people who once waved while walking their dogs now avoided eye contact. Some even crossed the street to steer clear of my yard. I realized the HOA wasn't just policing my property, they were shaping how the entire neighborhood saw me. The HOA had rules for everything. Holiday decorations couldn't go up more than 2 weeks before the date. Garbage bins had to be rolled in before 10 a.m. sharp. Curtains visible from the street could only be in neutral tones. I had thought those rules were harmless quirks, the kind of things you laugh about. But the board wasn't laughing. They enforced them with military precision. When I hung a strand of white lights along my porch in late November, I received a letter the next morning, a violation notice claiming they were distracting and excessive. White lights. On a porch. I ripped the paper in half, but I couldn't rip away the feeling that someone was watching me. It became impossible to relax. Every time I stepped outside, I wondered who was documenting me. A car idling too long at the corner, a neighbor lingering with their phone angled slightly toward my house. It was like living in a cage under constant surveillance. The more I resisted, the more they pushed back, as if the board was determined to break me down. But what they didn't know was that I was documenting them, too. Every letter, every fine, every ridiculous claim. I kept it all in a growing stack of folders, knowing that someday I might need proof. The breaking point came in the spring. I had planted sunflowers along the side of my house, tall, vibrant bursts of yellow that made me smile every morning. To me, they were harmless flowers. To the HOA, they were an unapproved landscaping project. Within days, I received a certified letter demanding their immediate removal. I ignored it. The next week, a new letter arrived, this one threatening daily fines of $100 until the flowers were gone. I could hardly believe it. Flowers. That's what had sparked their crusade. And then, one morning, I walked outside to find the sunflowers ripped out of the ground, stems broken, petals scattered across the soil like confetti from a cruel celebration. I stood there in silence, the anger boiling so hot inside me it felt like my chest might burst. Someone had come onto my property, destroyed something I had nurtured, and left without so much as a word. That's when I knew this wasn't just about enforcing rules. This was personal. I started hearing whispers that the board had singled me out deliberately. One member, in particular, had taken offense at my defiance. They called me a problem homeowner, a bad influence. Some even hinted they were planning to make an example of me. But here's the thing about being pushed too far. Once you hit that breaking point, fear turns into fire. And I was done being afraid. I began fighting back. I filed complaints, challenged fines, and demanded documentation of every so-called rule I had violated. The board responded by doubling down. More letters, more fines, more threats. At one point, they even suggested foreclosing on my home over unpaid dues. It was absurd, outrageous, and terrifying all at once. Neighbors whispered about me at HOA meetings, where my name became shorthand for troublemaker. But I wasn't about to let them win. I kept records, built my case, and prepared for the storm I knew was coming. And then it came. A notice of intent to place a lien on my house. Cold, sterile, and delivered with the casual cruelty of people who believed they held all the power. For a moment, I felt the walls close in. Was I really about to lose my home over sunflowers, lights, and grass? But that notice didn't break me. It lit a fire that would change everything. Because what the HOA didn't realize was that I had resources they couldn't imagine. And as they prepared to drag me into their web of petty control, I was quietly preparing something far bigger, a move that would turn the entire neighborhood upside down. The board thought they were tightening the noose, but in reality, they were walking straight into a trap of their own making. The day of the hearing felt like walking into a battlefield. For weeks, the HOA had been circling, tightening their grip, convinced they had me cornered. Letters piled on top of letters. Threats layered over threats. And now, the board had gathered in the community hall, eager to make their final move, foreclosure proceedings. I stepped inside the sterile room, lit by harsh fluorescent lights. At the center, a long table stretched out like a throne for the self-appointed rulers of Maplewood Estates. At the head sat the board president, the woman who had spearheaded every attack against me. Her arms were crossed, her smile thin, her eyes brimming with quiet confidence. She believed she was about to bury me. The room buzzed with neighbors. Some whispered, some pointed, and many simply stared. To them, I was either the villain who refused to follow the rules or the underdog daring to challenge the untouchable. Either way, the tension was thick enough to choke on. The president cleared her throat. We are here to address Mr. Smith's repeated violations and his refusal to comply with community standards. The board has voted to proceed with legal remedies, including but not limited to foreclosure. Her voice was cold, detached, like she was announcing the weather. For a moment, I let the silence hang. I wanted her to feel the weight of her words. Then, slowly, I pulled out the stack of files I've been building for months. Every letter, every fine, every photo. A paper trail of their harassment, laid out like evidence in a trial. I've kept records, I said, my voice steady. Every violation notice. Every time you enter my property without consent. every absurd demand and petty fine. And I've also consulted with counsel. I paused, savoring the flicker of surprise across their faces. What you've been doing isn't just harassment. It's unlawful. The room shifted. Whispers rippled through the neighbors. The president's smug expression faltered. I pressed forward, not giving her a chance to regain control. You've targeted me unfairly. Single me out. You've destroyed property on my land, levied baseless fines, and now you're attempting to seize my home over trumped-up claims. What you may not realize is that I am fully prepared to fight this in court. A collective intake of breath swept the room. I leaned closer, letting my words strike like a hammer. And here's what else you don't know. I'm not just a homeowner. I am a federal judge. The reaction was instant. Gasps, murmurs, neighbors turning to each other with wide eyes. The board members stiffened, their faces draining of color. The president's smile collapsed entirely. I continued. I have spent my career upholding the law, ensuring fairness, and dismantling corruption when it rears its head. And what you have done here, this abuse of power, this weaponization of rules meant to protect, not punish, is corruption, plain and simple. Her voice shook when she finally spoke. Why you can't threaten us? This isn't a threat, I cut in sharply. It's a promise. If you proceed, I will take this matter to court. I will subpoena your records. I will expose every questionable fine, every unlawful action, every abuse of authority. And when I'm finished, Maplewood Estates will no longer have a board. It will have a scandal. The silence that followed was deafening. The president tried to rally. This board acts in the best interests of the community. Really? I shot back. Ask them. I turned to the crowd of neighbors. Ask the families you've fined for paint colors. The parents you've threatened over basketball hoops. The elderly couple you cited for bird feeders. You've bullied people into silence. But today, I'm done being silent. The shift in the room was palpable. Neighbors who had once avoided eye contact now nodded, whispered, even muttered in agreement. The facade of control the board had clung to for so long began to crack. I slammed the final piece of evidence onto the table, a letter I had received just days earlier, threatening foreclosure if I didn't pay thousands in fines. This, I said, holding it up, is your smoking gun, proof that you would strip a homeowner of their property over grass, lights, and flowers. This isn't governance. It's greed, and I won't let you get away with it. The president's face turned crimson. She sputtered, searching for words, but none came. One of the board members leaned toward her, whispering urgently. Another avoided my gaze entirely, shame etched into his expression. And then, the final crack, a neighbor stood up. Then another. Voices rose, questions shouted. Why are we paying dues for this? Why are you targeting people? Who gave you this authority? The board's power, once absolute, crumbled in real time. Their iron grip on the community dissolved under the weight of collective anger and fear of exposure. I gathered my files, slid them neatly back into my folder, and stood tall. You wanted to make an example out of me, I said, my voice low but cutting. Congratulations. You did. You showed this entire neighborhood what happens when power goes unchecked. And now it ends. I turned and walked toward the door, the crowd parting as I passed. Behind me, the room erupted, some in outrage, some in applause, others in stunned silence. But one thing was clear, the board was finished. Yet even as I stepped outside, I knew this wasn't the end. Not yet, because when people who thrive on control feel it slipping away, they don't go quietly. The war with the HOA wasn't over, but for the first time, the balance of power had shifted, and soon, they would realize just how dangerous it is to push the wrong person too far. Walking out of that hearing, I could feel the weight of the entire neighborhood shifting. The board that once towered over everyone with smug authority had been exposed, cracked wide open under the pressure of their own arrogance. But if the climax of the battle happened inside those fluorescent-lit walls, the real war played out in the weeks and months that followed. At first, the HOA tried to maintain their facade of control. The president issued statements, claiming the board was acting in the best interest of the community and accusing me of intimidation. But the damage was done. The neighbors had seen the truth with their own eyes. The bullying, the pettiness, the hypocrisy. And when fear is broken, control collapses. Slowly, people began speaking out. One neighbor who had been fined for having a small garden shed came forward, sharing letters she had hidden in her kitchen drawer. Another revealed he'd paid thousands over unapproved roof shingles. Stories poured out like water from a burst dam. People realized they weren't alone. The board's reign of fear wasn't strength. It was smoke and mirrors. Within weeks, a petition began circulating to remove the president and two of her closest allies. Signatures piled up quickly, faster than anyone expected. The same people who once whispered about me in hushed tones now stopped me in the street, shook my hand, and thanked me. "You gave us courage," one man said. "We thought we had no choice but to take their abuse. You proved we do." The recall election was brutal. The president fought tooth and nail, sending letters, holding emergency meetings, even trying to scare residents with warnings of legal chaos if she were removed. But every word only made her look more desperate. When the votes were counted, the result wasn't even close. She was out, and with her, the old guard crumbled. The board was restructured, its members replaced by people who had lived under the same suffocating rules and wanted real change. New policies were drafted, focusing not on punishment, but on community. Rules were simplified, fines reduced, and transparency became mandatory. For the first time in years, the HOA actually served the people it claimed to represent. But the consequences for the ousted board members didn't end with a lost election. Remember those files I kept? Every letter, every fine, every invasive action? They became more than just evidence of harassment. They became the basis of a formal complaint. I submitted everything to the state regulatory agency overseeing homeowners associations. What followed was an investigation that tore apart the board's carefully constructed image of legitimacy. The agency uncovered financial irregularities, dues mismanaged, fines mishandled, funds spent without approval. The very people who claimed to uphold standards had been quietly bending the rules for themselves. While they fined others for paint colors, they waived violations on their own homes. While they demanded compliance from the community, they were busy siphoning money for personal projects. The investigation led to fines, sanctions, and the permanent barring of several board members from serving on any HOA again. The president, once the queen of Maplewood Estates, found her reputation in ruins. Neighbors who once tiptoed around her now avoided her entirely. She eventually sold her home and left the neighborhood altogether, disappearing from the community she had ruled with an iron fist. And me? I stayed. I tended to my garden, replanted the sunflowers they had destroyed, and watched them bloom taller than ever. Those flowers became a symbol, not just of defiance, but of survival. Every time I looked at them, I remembered that even when you're cornered, you can fight back. And when you fight smart, you can win. The impact rippled beyond Maplewood Estates. Surrounding neighborhoods heard about what had happened. Some reached out to me, asking for advice on handling their own HOAs. Others simply wanted reassurance that they weren't crazy, that the absurd battles over fences and flags weren't just theirs alone. And that's the part I'll never forget, the realization that what happened to me wasn't unique. Across the country, homeowners faced the same petty power struggles, the same fear of losing their homes over trivialities. HOAs were created to protect property values, but somewhere along the way, too many of them became breeding grounds for control, ego, and abuse.